So my name's Cheryl Wiltshire. I work here in the Department of Training and Workforce Development in the curriculum area. So when you're looking for me, you use the @DTWD addresses. And one of the areas that I have taken control of recently, taken over from the very capable hands of Margaret McHugh, is the CAVSS and USIQ curriculum and its evaluation and reaccreditation. I've always had some role in it, but now it's my major duty. What I want you to start off with is just a bit of a think of what learning support used to be like. So back in the 70s and the 80s, we first had volunteer tutors in the vocational education and training sector, TAFE, Technical College, back in those days. And so they were getting people untrained but willing to help to come in and give students a hand if their literacy and numeracy wasn't so good. Later, we ended up with some sort of homework centre type things, some drop-in centres, or maybe people might have got to the library or whatever. And sometimes those people were specialists with some more skills and able to actually provide that sort of learning support. They also, as time went on, we ended up with bridging courses. So in those areas where you might find that students were having particular problems, when I was working up in Northam, we had a bridging course for childcare students. So because they were coming in not necessarily with quite enough skills to cope with the diploma course that they were wanting to do, we'd have a Cert 3 or something like that that had some extra support. So there's been a range of those sorts of options that have been available now for many years. What happened in 2000, we had, based on a lot of pilots that were looking at what were the most successful features and not of those methods of learning support, we designed the course in applied vocational study skills here in Western Australia. It's become quite well known nationally. This report here, Working Together, was done by the University of Technology in Sydney and looks at all the methods of learning support around Australia and plumps for CAVSS as the one that they think comes closest to what they would hope to see us offering to students in the vocational sector. Those of you who've been around a while probably know quite a lot of the features of CAVSS, but in case that you or somebody else that's joining us later doesn't know, a quick review of what they are. So one of the really key things that we found in the research was that extra fees made it very hard for people to actually access learning support. They had to pay more. Often those people who were most needing it were not necessarily the most flush with extra money. So one of the things with CAVSS, it was fee-free. The other thing that often happens is that students have got so many things that they need to do in their life that finding the time to do extra study was really, really difficult. So CAVSS actually comes with no requirement for the student to spend extra time. One of the least popular methods of learning support in the past, and I still occasionally hear about it, is the one that's scheduled in lunch hour, so that everybody else gets a break and you get to go and do extra study. So CAVSS doesn't require that sort of extra time. It provides for extra teaching from somebody who has specialist skills, but not for extra assessment. What happened with a lot of the things, once we went to accredited programs with lots and lots of very detailed learning outcomes, we often ended up that if you needed any extra help, that meant you had a whole pile of extra assessment to do. And of course the staff members who were teaching you had to spend a lot of their time doing that extra assessment. So one of the features of CAVSS was it didn't have assessment that was required. The only assessment of the outcomes from the learning support was, did the student who was doing the vocational course do well? Did they learn what they needed to learn for the vocational course? So that was, a fairly radical departure once we had actually moved into that era. It wasn't that's how volunteer tutors worked. They didn't have to do a lot of assessment of every independent possible outcome that the students were achieving. But once we went to accredited courses, people were using programs like the Certificates in General Education for Adults, and they had great big long 80, 100-hour modules. Those modules often had huge amounts of outcomes that were just not required by the vocational student, but they still had to be assessed at least against whatever bit they did do. And often that meant that they had a record that was something that they hadn't passed. The other things that CAVSS did, because it was actually integrated into the program, there wasn't any need to be singling people out and going, okay, who's the person who's got the least literacy in this room? That's you. You taught all of the things that people were going to need. People took from it what they needed. If there was the occasional person who didn't need anything from what was being offered from the literacy or numeracy specialists, fine. But in most cases, we found through the pilots that if the inputs were high enough quality, everybody was actually getting benefits from it. And it's a dual enrolment course. When the department did some evaluations of both these programs recently, they discovered that CAVSS is pretty well known. So as I say, I've gone over those features to remind you of what they are. But USIQ, the underpinning skills in industry qualifications, is much less well known. Or there's confusion between the two. So the differences between USIQ and CAVSS, again, there's no fee. This time though, the whole point of the underpinning skills qualification was that there are some students who need a lot extra time to achieve outcomes. And that's because of issues that are about their environment or about the particular skills they're bringing to the class. It could be a whole range of different areas. So sometimes extra time is needed, and USIQ allows for that extra time, but also the extra teaching from somebody. They don't have to be literacy specialists in this case. If they're not teaching literacy, USIQ actually allows, and we'll have a look in a minute at what some of the other areas might be that USIQ could do. USIQ's actually the employability skills. So you know how literacy and numeracy fits in as one of the big chunks of employability skills? USIQ's that. It's the literacy, numeracy, plus all of those other things that are actually important for employment, but are the core soft skills. Again, there's no extra assessment, and again, it's a dual enrolment course. So what we're trying to achieve with both of those programs is to give better outcomes for the students. In the case of USIQ, it's actually saying some students are going to take more time to learn. It allows significant chunks of time. They also need some access at times to specialist teaching and a chance to learn and consolidate those underpinning skills. I've gone backwards instead of forwards. For those of you in the room, I've given you a little sample, and anybody who's wanting to watch this later on, a little sample of some of the curriculum documents that you can have a look at. These are available if you're watching at home on VetInfoNet under the adult literacy section of the website, and you can download both the USIQ course document there and the CAVSS. Look for the one that says business rules. At the back of them you'll find the course outline. So the USIQ course actually has 10 streams. That's made up of 73 different modules. All of them are elective, and students are allowed to do between 10 and 250 hours in a 6-month period. Those streams, if you have a look at that list there, you can see some of them are writing, numeracy, reading, comprehension, but there's other things like cognitive behaviours, cultural behaviours. One of the ones I handed out to the people who've come along today is a module called Develop Cultural Competence to Facilitate Formal Learning. Now this one, when I read through the outcomes in there, it talks about things like, identify different social and institutional practices and protocols, consider the roles of humour in cross-cultural contexts, discuss ways to respond to stigma and stereotyping. The trick with these is you don't have to do any or all of these. They're giving you an idea of what it might mean, what sorts of things might be relevant in any particular area. You're working on the specialist person who's working with you with this and the vocational lecturer to make a decision as to what's the most relevant bits. What are the bits of that make sense to your issue? I could see if you were doing a training for taxi drivers or for security guards where people are coming in large numbers from other cultures coming to work in Australia, where it's very much, we've got an Australian culture of what you do when you go out at night and how you behave and how people josh around with each other. Those sorts of issues could be the core thing that makes the difference between somebody who's successful in that industry and somebody who's not. So that's what USIQ's allowing for. USIQ's actually allowing not just for, okay, let's work on somebody who doesn't read very well or doesn't fill the right thing in on their occupational health and safety form. It's actually allowing for you to be looking at those deeper issues, the issues of culture, the issues of how people think and make decisions, the issues of using all the digital technology that's around us every day and that puts challenges on people, that vary depending on where they're coming from, what they already know. So it's allowing for all of those different areas. So that's why we're saying this is Western Australia's response to the employability skills issue. So it allows you, but because it doesn't specify, so if you read that great big long list there, if you had to sit down and try and do that, that's a 25-hour module. You couldn't do the whole lot of that in 25 hours. But what you can do is choose the bits that are crucial, that make sense, that are useful, or choose something else. Largely what the content for both CAVSS and USIQ modules are is a guide. And as much as anything, it's an explanation for other people. So what do you mean by helping with employability skills? You can use that as an example. Go, okay, for example, these sorts of things might need to be taught as part of what we're doing. And USIQ allows for both the time and you to find somebody who's got the skills to do those. Easier said than done sometimes, mind you, but that's what it's potentially allowing for. For those of you who have been involved with CAVSS delivery, one of the key things to remember is USIQ doesn't replace CAVSS. CAVSS was designed about 3 years before we went with USIQ. USIQ is an add-on to that, not as a replacement for it. And you can use them both. So if you're finding CAVSS being a course that actually is providing help for the whole class, a whole group of mainstream students, as team teaching, and in literacy and focused on the literacy and numeracy, because we believe that it actually works better to work on people's literacy and numeracy right there at the time they're trying to learn it, because while they're trying to learn the vocational area, because they're then focused on those skills, not on the skills that some teachers guessing they might actually need later. When I first met the issue of helping vocational students learn literacy, the lass was a hospitality student. And the hospitality lecturer came over and said, she's not dealing too well, I think it's a literacy issue. Can you do something? I didn't know what he was actually trying to achieve in his hospitality class. I didn't have his course materials. All I could do was actually look and see what the lass could do and decide whether or not there was something that I could teach her. So I'm making guesses. Okay, so maybe she needs to know some abbreviations to write down, is that a problem? Let's check that. That's what happens when we send people off to the literacy specialist to go and get help somewhere else. when the literacy specialist comes and works in the hospitality class, it becomes much, much easier to go, okay, now I can see what's the problem. You know, X, Y, whatever it is. And that they can actually tic-tac, try to work out what the solutions will be that will work in that context. The difference for USIQ actually is intended for those students who are marginalised for all sorts of reasons. The USIQ Business Rules gives you a whole list, and as I said before, it covers environment, it covers things like the way that the course is being delivered is particularly difficult. It also covers, you know, the student may have acquired brain injury or really some big gaps in their previous education. All sorts of things like that is the reason why you might decide that you want to actually design a course that has extra hours, much like we did with the bridging programs. But instead of what happened with the bridging programs when we went to the accredited courses, needing a whole pile of extra assessment, you know, to say, okay, they've learnt this set of communication skills, which again tended to take the focus away from the childcare outcome or the whatever. The USIQ allows you to still focus on the vocational outcomes and design based on those sorts of frameworks of, you know, something that's about numeracy, something that's about cognitive skills, etc., to actually design a program that's still focused on the vocational outcome. You can do some team teaching in USIQ, but it actually limits it because it says, you know, the team teaching is valuable up to a level, but eventually, if the student needs more help, then they probably need some more help outside of the team teaching classroom. And as we've already pointed out, USIQ covers a lot more areas than literacy and numeracy. So CAVSS was focused on just meeting the literacy and numeracy needs. With USIQ, you can meet the needs of all sorts of students with disabilities or cultural difference or whatever. We think here in the department that it's being used too little for those areas. The evaluation suggested that most USIQ delivery is still focused on literacy and numeracy. So that's an opportunity, I think, is to actually be thinking about what are the other areas where some extra time. One of the problems, of course, is to find the specialist people because, you know, sometimes those might be youth workers that have worked out how to talk to young people about X or Y, and that's the critical issue. That might be, you know, somebody that has a cultural, you know, has skills in helping students to learn to bridge cultures. So it might be an Aboriginal lecturer if you're working with a lot of Aboriginal students and you're actually going, okay, what we need here is somebody who's mastered working between those two worlds, the world of Aboriginal culture and the rest of Australian society in the workplace. So USIQ is actually built to be able to buy in that Aboriginal lecturer and pay for them to work as part of your team or the youth worker or the whatever. So we're not saying, you know, somebody get them to teach the maths, because if you're struggling with teaching maths, then what you need is to bring somebody in who knows more about how you teach maths. But if you're struggling with how to teach cross-cultural issues, then bringing in somebody who's able to actually work as a team with you to do that would be a really useful thing. For USIQ, like CAVSS, students have to be enrolled in a vocational course. We don't add USIQ or CAVSS onto courses that are already designed to do what they're designed to do. So if you're in your organisation got a bridging course or a adult literacy course or something like that, and they say, oh, we'd like more staff, they're not able to get more staff by means of adding in CAVSS and USIQ. So it's fairly broad. It's anybody except the people who are already supposedly in a program that's going to build their literacy, numeracy and employability skills. So not the access courses, not adult literacy courses. Other than that, there's a very long list that is, you know, allows you to look at boxes in terms of having additional educational support needs for the USIQ course. For CAVSS, you actually just need to make an assessment that having some extra literacy support is going to improve what happens in that classroom. So for whatever reason, that either the lecturers wanting to have some extra time dedicated to the literacy and numeracy issues because they just got, there's so much content to be got through that having that extra person who actually can focus on the literacy and numeracy is going to make a big difference for the students, or because they know that the cohort of students coming through at the moment have got particular levels of issues, then that's the way that CAVSS is allocated. The funding, if you're in a state training provider, the budgets for these sit over in the adult literacy access participation area and needs to be negotiated because it actually needs to be managed along with the other general education access programs. Generally, we've moved up to, in 2000 having a few students doing the pilot for this to having over 7,000 students enrolled in any year now. So it's been growing gradually, regularly and quite significantly in Western Australia. It's also moved to other states. It comes and goes along with policies, but other states have picked this up as well and added into their program. If you're not working with a state training provider and you're interested in CAVSS and USIQ, what happened with Future Skills is that these courses became priority skills, foundation skills that are on a priority list, which mean that they're fee-free and that RTOs can apply to use them at the same time as they apply for the other vocational programs they're offering, whether they're an apprenticeship or whatever. There are some limitations. They must be already using the hours that they are given as for the vocational course. So sometimes RTOs, deliver very tiny chunks of hours to their students, and so they're not doing very well. I need some more hours to help them. But they're sort of assuming that they're just going off home and reading learning guides for most of their study time. We go, use some of those hours that are going to those students before you go look to try and add more delivery. Largely with CAVSS and USIQ, they work on a face-to-face model anyway, so they're the other people that have difficulty in being able to use this model, because if students are never ever seen by somebody to teach them, CAVSS and USIQ won't work because they're actually based on having specialist skills. How are we going? Yep. So USIQ is actually designed based on education theory. You'll find when you read a USIQ module, and those of you at home, I hope you've been onto VetInfoNet now and found the course. And for those of you in the room, I've given you a copy. You'll see there's actually 4 boxes with a chunk of learning in each. So what that course structure is about is, first it's about breaking up the code of whatever the chunk of knowledge is. So with reading, everybody thinks of reading phonics. Yeah, you've got to be able to know the alphabet and decode letters. Yeah, that's one of your subsets of reading. But we actually believe, from a theory perspective, that most other things are like that. Others are very much like that. Firstly, you need to know the code of what actually works for that area. So you'll find in a lot of these modules, like this one, the one in front of you there about the cultural competence, says identify different linguistic codes, language and dialect used by self and others. So it talks about codes. So that's starting off with, what's the basic terminology, the key things that you use to actually manipulate to create this set of knowledge. The next one is about getting meaning. So come back to the reading idea. It's no good just being able to sound out words. If you can't get any meaning out of that word, then you're not reading. So the next part of reading is being able to understand something as a result of the reading, not just sort of sounding out some letters. The third one is about using it. So again, use it in the reading context. Okay, you've understood it. Can you use what you've read? If it's a recipe, can you follow that recipe and do something as a result of the directions that are put there? If it's a safety report, can you get the points out of that and go, okay, that means we've got to do X or Y. And the fourth box is actually about critique. And we don't view this, sometimes a lot of accredited courses put the critique level as sort of like the top level, you know, only the people do that up when they get up to diploma level sort of thing. In this set of education theory, critique is actually something that people can do at any level. They can work out, this works for me, this doesn't, you know, that makes sense, that doesn't. And they can work on combining things. So not necessarily just accepting a set of knowledge as holus bolus. The important thing of USIQ is actually requiring teachers to have a creative input. Because it's not sitting there going, here's the 3 learning outcomes you've got to teach and this is exactly what you're going to know you've taught it. Or even better, what some of the old courses might have done was saying, these are the activities you're going to do. We don't get much of that these days. You know, that's usually you're left to work those out. But with USIQ, the idea is teachers have to be creative in looking at what's needed and how to get there. And generally, if they're in the right environment, like they actually can, you know, work that out and see what's needed and provide that help. It's based on 3 principles: getting to know the student, looking at the teaching, what you have to teach, pulling it all apart and going, what is it that we're actually trying to achieve here? And then working on the strengths the students are bringing. What often happens in general education classrooms is we spend all our times trying to find what the students aren't good at and trying to fix it. So, okay, they can't spell these 10 words, I'm going to fix that. They can't. Often they're not 10 words they're ever going to use. So what happens? You've spent ages making sure you fix those words they couldn't spell, and 2 years later down the track, they still can't spell those words. All they're convinced is they're not very good at spelling because they know they spend an awful lot of time and they still don't remember them. If those 10 words are words that are actually tied into their vocation, into their training, and they then go on and use them for the next 2 years, they will never forget those words. They learnt them, they used them, they practiced them. And so they become things that are actually part of their whole self. So the actual industry context is part of the strengths that students have to build on when they're doing programs like CAVSS and USIQ. But more than that, every student has things that they're good at. And what the CAVSS and USIQ learning support is based on the idea that if you actually look at encouraging people to recognise what they're good at and use those skills, then that's 100% on actually spending a lot of time telling them everything they're bad at. Because that's what a lot of literacy support's been like in the past. It's been, give them a big test, find out all the things they're bad at, try and fix those. CAVSS and USIQ works the other way. We say, yeah, we know everybody's bad at lots of stuff. Yeah, most students aren't coming to TAFE because they're the whiz-bang, you know, hot top of the class literacy numeracy student. Yeah, there'll be gaps. But the issue is they've also got strengths. They're there because generally they've chosen to learn something and are ready for that, making that and are keen to get out there, make money and do well in their particular field. It's based on the theory that nobody's a blank slate, that people have got a language, sometimes several languages, that they do know how to talk differently to different groups of people. That varies, of course. Younger people sometimes need a bit of help, and learning you can't sound exactly the same when you're talking to every different group. So that's one of our big jobs coming into vocational training, is to teach people. In technical terms, it's called code switching. Being able to change your register, being able to change the way you speak. People have come with a different history, an educational history, a family history, a history in terms of what they've done in workplaces before, and also in their interests, what things that you can capture. When you're trying to pull apart what you're teaching to make that decision about what you need to do, these are the sorts of questions you can ask yourself. So, particularly those people who've been teaching something for a long time, it becomes really, really important to think about the knowledge that's being taken for granted. This is sometimes what a CAVSS and USIQ person can bring in to a team, because they're not the specialist childcare lecturer. So they can be listening and going, okay, I can see why that concept's a bit hard to get, because I'm really having to work hard here. And they can be helping to contribute to the team of what's the knowledge that we're thinking that everybody's got, or that just because you've been in the industry a long time, you've forgotten that people don't come in with that. The concepts, trying to unpack what the concepts are, what are the core concepts, how those are grounded in culture. So, like we were talking before about the security guards and the humour and those sorts of things. Quite different senses of humour in different cultures. So learning to deal with the issues of humour and communication are quite important in lots and lots of different industries. Working out how you're going to find that out when concepts are a problem and how to build on them. Those are really big issues when you're actually thinking about what it is that can be taught. When to build on the strengths, going from those things that are familiar, that are accepted by a particular student, and building the new ones on top of them is one of the important things. And letting your groups do some of that work, not assuming everybody has to learn everything by themselves, is another important part of the strength-based learning. So that, if you're wanting to have a look at some more of that structure, that theory that the USIQ course in particular is built on, it's called the 4 resources model, and it comes from Alan Luke and Peter Freebody, 1999. So I've just put a summary up of what they are, the codes, the meanings, the using the text, and also the critical analysis. Okay, so I said to you at the beginning, there's other options. If you go, nah, that whole idea of not needing assessment and whatever is not for me, what we really need here is we need to know that students have got this set of math skills, for example, and that they've actually achieved a particular level. Yep, we've got that. The Foundation Skills Training Package, was designed, forgotten the year now, but not very long ago, just a few years ago. They looked at CAVSS and USIQ and they said, we can do this better. So what they did is they based the Foundation Skills Training Package on the Australian Core Skills Framework, and it is all levels. So what it's useful for, so if you do say, well, look, I need students that I can guarantee before they leave this course, they've got this set of math skills at this level, you could use a unit from the Foundation Skills Training Package to mark that. And because they're actually designed to as training package units, they're really easy to import into training package courses. Here in WA, we've looked at, and we didn't get excited about it being actually a learning support model. We can see it as an assessment model, as a model that says, I'm going to make sure that students do have this level of skills, but we don't actually see that it's doing anything very exciting as far as learning support. So you can't use the funding from the adult literacy area to actually use to deliver the foundation skills training package, because we haven't put it on the foundation skills list. What you can do is, if you do see that as a need within any particular vocational area, is import it into that vocational course. So if you need that maths unit, you need that set of skills to be checked off, then all of that training package is available as electives to be drawn into any course. What I would warn you though, that quality of teaching is still your issue. Good CAVSS and good USIQ depends on having people who know what they're doing. People have actually had a bit of a chance to work together with a vocational team to work out what it is that's needed for that group of students. Some people aren't good at it, and our recommendation in the training we give to literacy teachers doing the CAVSS induction is, if you're not good at this, don't do it, because it actually does depend on people who are actually able to fit in, to listen, to learn, and be a good part, a useful part of a vocational classroom. If you have foundation skills training package units, you still need that same skill. You need somebody who really does know. The training package doesn't necessarily give you very strong signals about who that person will be. I think here in WA we spend a lot more time trying to explain who we think would have the skills, whereas the training package is a bit wishy-washy about that. But in terms of making the decision about who to match together to offer those things, it's still an issue. So you need to find the person who can do the job. My last word is about doing it yourself. And really that's what has been happening for most students most of the time over most of the history of vocational education and training. We do have the TAE LN 401, I think it had an A and a B on it from now. I think it's dropped to just as now. I would call that the first aid level. So that, as an elective of Cert 4, the training and assessment Cert 4, is some basic understanding that allows people to talk about literacy with specialists and to understand a bit more about how important it might be, what you might do about it, whatever. There is a misconception that it's enough to actually be able to teach literacy. And of course it's not, any more than the 20 hours of first aid is enough to be able to treat people medically. It's a very important start, it's a very important help. It allows you to make identifications of what to do. It allows you to know when to ask for help. But I would not encourage anybody to think of it as enough to be confident that, we've dealt with literacy now. But do it yourself, I think, is really a reasonable thing to do in many cases. But you need to be looking to learn from your students, from other staff, from employers even, as to what's important and what's working and what isn't, and sharing what you learn and letting students share. One of the things we learnt most from the pilots for CAVSS in particular was the difference it makes when students stop viewing each other as, if I help that person I'm going to be in trouble for cheating, or get help from somebody else, I'm cheating, to we're in this together, we can learn together. The big difference that makes is enormous. I apologise that our presentation today was very much not the conversation I was hoping it might have been, But please, if you wish to, contact me if you've got questions that you'd like to discuss. I'm very happy to help people to make those choices, to be thinking about, whether they want to be involved in CAVSS, how they do that, whether USIQ's for them, what might be the interesting things that would apply in their area. So please feel free to send me an email or give me a call here at the department. And I'd love to hear from you if you're thinking about how to make those choices.
Authorised by the Government of Western Australia, Perth.